Hey guys, tonight we're diving deep into the world of Roman aqueducts, those magnificent structures that brought life-giving water to the heart of the Roman Empire. We're talking engineering feats that are still breathtaking today, centuries after the last Roman boot crunched across the Appian Way. Now, before you get any ideas about a relaxing, floaty experience, let's be clear, plumbing is about to get epic. You probably won't survive this level of detail. I'm kidding, mostly. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe channel, History for Sleep, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Go on. It helps the algorithm understand my soothing tones aren't just background noise for your cat. And while you're at it, drop your location and local time in the comments. I'm genuinely curious where in the world you're winding down with me. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Imagine a Rome far removed from the fountains and baths you see in postcards. We're talking early Rome, centuries before the Colosseum's roar. The city, nestled by the Tiber River, faced a constant thirst. The Tiber, while crucial, wasn't always the cleanest or most reliable source. Its water levels fluctuated. And let's just say Roman sanitation practices weren't exactly up to modern standards. Think more colorful than clear. This thirst drove a profound need. A need for a consistent, clean water supply that could sustain a growing population. It was a need that would push Roman ingenuity to its limits, resulting in a network of aqueducts so sophisticated, so ambitious. They still inspire awe. The Romans weren't just building plumbing, they were building an empire upon it. Water wasn't just essential, it was power. It allowed them to grow their cities, build their infrastructure, and essentially, conquer the known world. Historians still argue whether the aqueducts were a primary driver of Roman expansion, or simply a consequence of it. But one thing is undeniable: water and the Roman Empire are inextricably linked. The scale of what the Romans achieved is truly mind-boggling. We often think of their roads and their military might. But the aqueducts? These structures, often stretching for miles across the countryside, represented a commitment to civic life, to public health, that was unparalleled in the ancient world. They're a testament to Roman engineering genius, resourcefulness, and a slightly obsessive need for a good bath. And hey, if you think your water bill is high. One quirky tidbit, apparently. Wealthy Romans were known to complain about the constant sound of water flowing through the aqueducts. Like, oh, the ceaseless rush of perfectly pure water is just so disruptive to my afternoon nap. First world problems, even in the 1st century. Mainstream historical fact: the Romans built over 11 major aqueducts to serve the city. A system so vast and complex it remained unmatched for centuries. So, there you are, in Rome around the late 4th century BC. The city's buzzing, expanding like dough left out in the sun, and that murky Tiber just isn't cutting it anymore. The wells are overdrawn. The springs within the city walls are stressed, and the sheer number of people means, well, let's just say waste management is becoming a noticeable issue. The air probably carries a certain ripe quality, especially downwind from the river on a hot day. You need more water, clean water, and you need it reliably. Enter a man with a plan. Or maybe just a man with serious ambition and a knack for getting big things done, Appius Claudius Caecus. This name might ring a bell, perhaps from dusty history lessons. Yes. That Appius Claudius. In 312 BC, while he held the powerful office of censor, basically the guy in charge of public works, finances, and keeping track of citizens, he wasn't just thinking about water. He was simultaneously overseeing the construction of one of Rome's most famous arteries, the Via Appia, the Appian Way. Talk about multitasking on an epic scale. Imagine the project management meetings. Okay team, this morning we're aligning paving stones south towards Capua. This afternoon we're calculating the gradient for 10 miles of underground water channel. Any questions? No? Good. Now, when you picture Roman aqueducts, you probably imagine those iconic soaring arches stretching across the landscape. Forget that for now. The Aqua Appia, Rome's very first foray into large-scale water transport, was shy. It was built almost entirely underground. Out of its total length of about 16.5 kilometers, that's roughly 10 miles, only a tiny fraction, maybe less than 100 meters, ran on low-surface structures within the city itself. Why hide it away? Several reasons likely played a part. Firstly, security. An underground channel is much less vulnerable to sabotage by enemies. Rome was still consolidating its power in Italy. Leaving your primary water source exposed wasn't the smartest strategic move. Think of it as early infrastructure security through obscurity. Secondly, building underground avoided carving up valuable agricultural land and negotiating endless property rights for an above-ground structure. It was less disruptive. Perhaps cheaper in terms of land acquisition, even if the digging was hard work. And maybe, just maybe, the engineering for grand, above-ground structures hadn't quite been perfected yet. This was version 1.0, the beta test of Roman hydroengineering. Keep it simple, keep it solid. The construction itself would have been a monumental effort, even mostly underground. Imagine teams of laborers digging trenches, sometimes several meters deep, through the volcanic tough soil around Rome. They'd carve out a channel, likely rectangular. Maybe about waist high and wide enough for a maintenance worker to squeeze through later. They'd line it, perhaps with cut stone blocks carefully fitted together. Or maybe an early form of mortar sealing the joints, aiming for that crucial watertightness. Then, they'd cover it all back up, burying the channel beneath fields and hillsides, leaving little visible trace except for occasional access shafts used for inspection and cleaning. Where hills blocked the path, they wouldn't build grand bridges over them yet. They'd tunnel through them. Hard, sweaty work with picks, shovels, and probably a lot of grunting. The source for the Aqua Appia wasn't a mighty river like the Tiber or the later Anio. Instead, engineers identified a series of springs in the volcanic Alban Hills, somewhere around 15 kilometers east of the city. Pinpointing the exact springs used is tricky. Historians still argue whether the original sources were precisely the ones Frontinus, later water commissioner, will meet, described. Or if other nearby springs contributed or were tapped later ***, blurring the historical water map. What matters is they found a source sufficiently elevated to allow water to flow downhill, purely by gravity, all the way into Rome. This principle, gravitas, or gravity flow, would remain the cornerstone of Roman aqueduct design for the next 5 centuries. No pumps. No complex machinery, just meticulous surveying and a gentle, continuous slope. Compared to the giants that would follow, the Aqua Appia was modest. Its channel was smaller. Its discharge volume significantly less, perhaps delivering around 73,000 cubic meters of water per day. That sounds like a lot, and it was a huge improvement for Rome. But later aqueducts would dwarf this capacity. This initial effort wasn't about ostentatious displays of wealth or supplying lavish imperial baths, those didn't really exist yet. It was about practicality. It had to be. This reflects that early Roman characteristic often called gravitas, a sense of seriousness, responsibility, and pragmatism. Solve the problem, do it well. Don't make unnecessary fuss. Build the road, bring the water. Where did this precious new water end up? Not spraying dramatically from a Trevi fountain replica. The Aqua Appia terminated at a low elevation within the city, near the Forumborium, the cattle market, located close to the Tiber. This suggests its primary beneficiaries were the commercial heart of the city, providing water for livestock, cleaning market areas, perhaps supplying some public basins or troughs, ***. and undoubtedly improving basic sanitation in a busy, grubby part of town. Maybe a few nearby workshops or businesses benefited too. It was water for the working city. A foundational layer of infrastructure. Now for a quirky tidbit about the man behind it all, Appius Claudius Caecus. The name, Caecus, means, the blind. Tradition holds that he lost his sight later in life, possibly due to illness or a curse, depending on who you ask, after his censorship and the initiation of these massive projects. Still, there's a certain irony, isn't there? A blind man overseeing the construction of both a major road stretching for miles and Rome's first complex underground water system. Perhaps it gave him a unique perspective? Or maybe it just proves you don't need perfect eyesight to have grand vision and push through enormous public works. You can imagine him, perhaps, running his hands over scale models, relying on detailed verbal reports, his other senses sharpened. Or maybe it's just a fun historical coincidence. Makes you wonder how those project update meetings really went. Appius, the tunnels hit solid rock. Sounds expensive. Route around it. The completion of the Aqua Appia in 312 BC marked a turning point, a mainstream historical fact you can bank on. It was Rome's declaration that it wouldn't be limited by the water within its immediate reach. It demonstrated the political will and the nascent engineering skill to reach out and bring essential resources into the city's heart. It was a quiet revolution happening beneath the earth. A hidden flow that laid the groundwork for the sanitary standards, public health improvements, and sheer urban scale that would come to define Rome. It wasn't flashy, it wasn't towering. But it worked. And for the Romans, that was often the highest praise. You could almost feel the collective sigh of relief as cleaner, more reliable water began to trickle into the bustling markets near the river, a subtle but profound shift in the daily life of the burgeoning city. The taste of water. Finally free from the Tiber's less savory contributions, a small luxury, perhaps, but a significant one. That hidden trickle from the Aqua Appia, revolutionary as it was, couldn't quench Rome's growing thirst forever. You fast forward about 40 years from its completion, landing yourself around 272 BC. Rome is flexing its muscles, expanding its influence across the Italian peninsula. The city itself is becoming denser, more complex. The single, modest flow of the Appia, terminating down by the cattle market, just isn't enough anymore. More people need more water, and they need it in more places than just the low-lying commercial district. The demand is palpable. A constant pressure building alongside the city's population. Fortunately for Rome's hydration situation, the Republic had just wrapped up a rather significant military engagement, the Pyrrhic War. They'd tangled with Pyrrhus of Epirus, a formidable Greek general who famously won battles at such great cost it coined the term Pyrrhic victory. Well, Rome ultimately came out on top. And victory meant spoils, treasure, captured resources, ready cash flowing into the state coffers. And what better way for a Roman magistrate to make a name for himself and benefit the city than by funding a massive public work? Enter Manius Curius Dentatus, holding the office of censor in 272 BC. He saw the need for more water and had the means, thanks to Pyrrhus's involuntary contribution to the Roman treasury. Dentatus himself is a character worth mentioning. A rather delightful quirky tidbit paints him as a figure of old-fashioned Roman virtue, known for his incorruptibility and simple living. The story goes that ambassadors from the Samnites once found him cooking turnips for his dinner and tried to bribe him with a large amount of gold. He supposedly refused, stating he preferred ruling over owners of gold to owning it himself, and that his simple meal was sufficient. Whether strictly true or not, it paints a picture of a man perhaps less interested in personal luxury and more focused on practical necessities for the state, like water. A man boiling turnips probably wasn't demanding Perrier for the masses, just more water. So, Dentatus commissioned Rome's second aqueduct. It would tap into the Anio River, known as the Anio in Latin. Hence the name, much further upstream than Rome, near the town of Tiber, modern Tivoli, nestled in the hills east of the city. This new venture was fittingly named the Annio Vetus, the Old Annio, distinguishing it from a later aqueduct, the Annio Novus, that would also draw from the same river system. Construction began under Dentatus, but he died within a few years, leaving the completion of the project to his fellow censor, Fulvius Flaccus, around 269 BC. Choosing the Annio River itself, rather than just springs, was a game-changer. Rivers carry significantly more water than springs. The Annio Vetus was designed to deliver a much larger volume than the Appia. Estimates suggest maybe double the amount, perhaps around 180,000 cubic meters per day. This was a serious upgrade in quantity. However, tapping a river, especially one flowing through varied terrain, comes with its own set of challenges. Unlike the relatively pure, filtered water emerging from springs, river water picks up stuff, silt, sediment, organic matter, especially after heavy rains turning the upstream tributaries into muddy torrents. The Annio Vetus quickly gained a reputation for delivering water that was often cloudy, murky, and generally less desirable than the clear flow of the Appia. You wouldn't be filling your finest crystal goblet with this stuff, probably. More like sluicing down the drains and watering the vegetable patch. The Roman engineers weren't oblivious to this. They recognized the need for some form of water treatment, however basic. Along the course of the Annio Vetus, they incorporated settling basins, known as piscini limerii, literally, mud ponds or settling tanks. Imagine wide, shallow basins built into the aqueduct channel where the water could slow down, allowing some of the heavier suspended particles, the sand, the grit, the general river gunk, to settle to the bottom before the water continued its journey towards Rome. Workers would then periodically need to drain these basins and muck out the accumulated sludge. It was an early, rudimentary form of water purification. Now, historians debate how truly effective these early piscini were at removing fine sediment, or if their main benefit was perhaps more about flow regulation, providing a small buffer storage or simply catching the worst of the debris. It was certainly better than nothing. But the Annio Vetus water never achieved the sparkling reputation of later spring-fed aqueducts. Think of it as the tap water you use for washing the car, not the fancy bottled stuff. In terms of construction, the Annio Vetus represented another significant leap in ambition. It was much, much longer than the Aqua Appia, snaking its way across the landscape for approximately 64 kilometers, about 40 miles. Like the Appia, it ran mostly underground, likely for the same reasons, security, avoiding land disruption, and perhaps still lacking the confidence or necessity for extensive above-ground arcades. Building a channel nearly 4 times the length of the first one required far more complex surveying to maintain that crucial gentle gradient over such a distance. Imagine the surveyors with their simple levels, perhaps the chorobates, a long trough filled with water acting as a spirit level, meticulously plotting the course, ensuring the water would flow steadily downhill without pooling or rushing too quickly. The sheer manpower involved in digging that much trench and tunnel through the Italian countryside, using only hand tools, is staggering to consider. This wasn't a weekend DIY project, it was a multi-year, state-funded undertaking, powered by the spoils of war and undoubtedly a lot of sweat. The Annio Vetus, being Rome's second aqueduct and completed around 269 BC after Dentatus's death, stands as a mainstream fact marking Rome's growing capabilities. It demonstrated the ability to finance and construct infrastructure on a much grander scale. Crucially, because it tapped the Annio River much higher up in the hills. The Annio Vetus arrived in Rome at a higher elevation than the Aqua Appia. This meant it could serve parts of the city that the lower-level Appia couldn't reach, potentially supplying water to public fountains and buildings on some of Rome's famous hills. This expansion of the water network was vital for the city's continued, less constrained growth. So, By the mid-3rd century BC, Rome had 2 aqueducts. One, the Appia, delivering a modest but clean supply to the lower commercial areas. The second, the Annio Vetus, providing a much larger volume. Capable of reaching higher elevations, but with water quality that charitably could be described as variable. It highlights a key theme in Roman engineering: iterative improvement. They built the Appia, learned from it, then aimed bigger with the Annio Vetus, tackling new challenges like source quality and distance. They hadn't perfected it yet. The quest for both quantity and quality would drive the next wave of aqueduct construction, but they were learning, adapting, and laying down the infrastructure. Kilometer by painstaking kilometer, that would allow Rome to truly become Rome. You can almost picture the Roman citizens tasting the new water supply, maybe a little gritty. Maybe needing to be left to settle in a household jar, but abundant. And sometimes, quantity has a quality all its own, especially when you're really thirsty. So, Rome now has 2 water lines, the reliable but small Appia and the voluminous but moody Annio Vetus. For over a century, this is the situation. But Rome in 144 BC isn't the same city it was when the Annio Vetus was built. This is Rome flexing on the world stage. Just 2 years earlier, in 146 BC, Roman legions had decisively ended their rivalries with Carthage and Corinth, by utterly destroying both cities. Wealth, slaves, and confidence were flooding into the Republic. With this newfound power and riches came rising expectations. The murky, sometimes gritty water of the Annio Vetus, while plentiful, was starting to feel a bit subpar. Especially for the increasingly affluent citizens who were developing a taste for finer things. The Appia's water was cleaner, sure, but there just wasn't enough of it. And it couldn't reach the higher, more desirable parts of the expanding city. You can almost hear the grumbling in the forums, honestly. We can conquer Greece, but we can't get a decent glass of water on the Palatine Hill? The Senate, ever responsive, eventually, to the needs and complaints of the populace, decided it was time for an upgrade. In 144 BC, they tasked the praetor Urbanus, the magistrate essentially responsible for the administration of the city, Quintus Marcius Rex, with a crucial job. His official mandate was twofold: first, inspect and repair the aging channels of the Appia and Annio Vetus, which were no doubt suffering from leaks and blockages after more than a century, Appia, and 120+ years, Vetus, of service. Second, and more significantly, he was commissioned to construct a new aqueduct, one that would provide a supply of water sufficient for the city's needs and, crucially, of superior quality. Marcius Rex took this commission seriously. The quest began for a water source that wasn't just abundant, but pristine. Scouts and engineers ranged far into the Annio Valley, upstream from Tivoli, near the sources of the Annio Vetus, but this time they weren't looking at the river itself. They targeted specific, high-altitude springs known to the locals for their exceptional clarity and, importantly, their icy coldness even in the heat of summer. Pliny the Elder, writing centuries later, would wax lyrical about these springs, calling the water the most celebrated water in the whole world and a gift of the gods to the city. Finding and securing the rights to these springs was the first critical step. This wasn't going to be another murky river feed, this was targeted sourcing for quality. What followed was the construction of the Aqua Marcia, an aqueduct that would become legendary. Built between 144 and 140 BC, it was an engineering marvel for its time. First, its sheer length was unprecedented. Approximately 91 kilometers, about 56 miles, from those distant springs to the heart of Rome. This made it substantially longer than even the Annio Vetus. Maintaining a consistent, gentle gravitational slope over such a vast distance, crossing varied terrain, required incredibly precise surveying and planning. But the real game changer, the feature that visually distinguishes the Marcia and sets the stage for future aqueducts, was its extensive use of above-ground arcades. while the Appia and Anio Vetus were primarily subterranean. The Marcia boldly took to the air. Roughly 11 kilometers, about 7 miles, of its final approach to Rome were carried atop magnificent arched structures. Why the shift? As aqueducts reached further for better sources, they inevitably had to cross low plains, valleys, and depressions in the landscape near Rome, the Campagna. To maintain the necessary height for gravity flow and reach the higher parts of the city, tunneling deeply or taking incredibly long detours around these features became impractical. The solution was to build bridges, long, multi-arched bridges or arcades, to carry the water channel straight across, high above the ground. This required a significant leap in engineering skill. Building stable, durable arches capable of supporting the weight of a constantly flowing channel, sometimes at considerable heights, demanded sophisticated knowledge of structural forces, solid foundation work, and high-quality materials and masonry. It also transformed the aqueduct from a hidden utility into a monumental statement, striding across the countryside, visibly proclaiming Rome's power and ingenuity. Imagine the sight for travelers approaching Rome, these graceful, man-made rivers flowing through the air. It must have been awe-inspiring. And the water. The effort paid off spectacularly. The Aqua Marcia delivered on its promise of quality. Its water was renowned for being exceptionally cold, clear, and pure-tasting. It quickly became the preferred drinking water in Rome, the standard against which all other sources were judged. It was the water served in the homes of the wealthy. The water considered healthy and refreshing. You can imagine the relief, the sheer pleasure, of drinking truly cold, clean water after years of making do with the often tepid, cloudy offerings of the Anio Vetus. It was the ancient Roman equivalent of switching from gritty well water to premium alpine spring water delivered to your door. Furthermore, the Marcia's engineering allowed it to reach a high elevation within Rome, terminating on the Capitoline Hill itself, the religious and political heart of the city. This was a major achievement, supplying the strategic heights that previous aqueducts couldn't easily reach. Delivering this pure, cold water to the very pinnacle of Roman power held immense symbolic value. It was a tangible demonstration of the state's ability to provide the best for its citizens, or at least, its most important ones, and its mastery over nature. Such a massive project required significant funding, while direct records might be sparse. The timing strongly suggests that the enormous wealth plundered from the destruction of Carthage and Corinth in 146 BC helped finance the Aqua Marcia. It's a classic Roman pattern. Military conquest fuels civic infrastructure development. Victory abroad translates into better living standards at home. Interestingly, even this celebrated project wasn't without its challenges. And not just engineering ones. Here's a quirky tidbit. Apparently, there was political opposition to bringing the Marcia's water all the way up to the Capitoline Hill. Opponents, perhaps representing factions with different priorities or maybe just grumpy traditionalists, invoked the Sibylline books, cryptic prophetic texts consulted in times of uncertainty. They claimed the prophecies forbade bringing this specific water source to that specific location. Quintus Marcius Rex, however, seems to have been a practical man focused on his mandate. Bolstered by other favorable omens, and likely strong political backing, he effectively pushed past these objections and completed the aqueduct as planned, all the way to the top of the Capitoline. Even vital infrastructure wasn't immune to political wrangling and appeals to ancient superstition. Makes you wonder if someone just didn't want the construction noise near their villa. Now, when you look at the remaining arches that carried the Marcia, often sharing support structures with later aqueducts, historians debate the precise details of the original 144 to 140 BC construction versus subsequent repairs, reinforcements, and rebuilds over the centuries. Augustus, for instance, later repaired the Marcia significantly. Untangling the exact stonework layers and dating them precisely is a complex archaeological puzzle. But the legacy is clear. The Aqua Marcia, completed around 140 BC, set a new benchmark. It proved Rome could build longer, higher, and more complex aqueducts. It introduced the large-scale use of arcades, creating the iconic image we associate with Roman aqueducts. And most importantly, it delivered the gold standard in water quality, quenching Rome's thirst with cold, pure spring water that became the envy of the ancient world. It was more than just plumbing, it was a symbol of Rome's arrival as a sophisticated, dominant power, capable of bending nature to its will for the health and comfort of its citizens. The era of hiding pipes underground was ending, the age of monumental water architecture had begun. The magnificent Aqua Marcia, with its cool, pure water striding into Rome on impressive arches, certainly raised the bar. You'd think Rome might finally be content, water-wise. At least for a little while. But Rome's thirst, like its ambition, seemed insatiable. Just 15 years or so after the Marcia began delivering its celebrated flow, around 125 BC, another aqueduct was constructed, the Aqua Tepula. Now, this one was a bit different. Its name, Tepula, gives you a clue, it means tepid or lukewarm. Unlike the icy kiss of the Marcia, the Tepula drew its water from volcanic springs in the Alban Hills, resulting in a naturally warm supply. Compared to the Marcia or even the Anio Vetus, the Tepula was a relatively modest affair in terms of volume. It flowed into Rome on its own channel initially, likely less remarkable architecturally than the Marcia's grand arcades. Its unique selling point was simply that warmth. Perhaps it found specific uses, maybe preheating water for baths or for industrial processes that benefited from non-chilled water. Or perhaps its slightly elevated temperature was just tolerated because, well, it was still water. Historians debate the precise temperature of the Aqua Tepula as it reached the city and whether this warmth was considered a useful feature or just an unavoidable characteristic of that particular source. Imagine turning on your tap and getting consistently lukewarm water, maybe nice for washing hands in winter, but perhaps less refreshing for a drink on a hot Roman afternoon. The Tepula existed, doing its lukewarm thing, for nearly a century. But the truly transformative moment for Rome's water supply after the Marcia came later, during the tumultuous transition from republic to empire. Enter Marcus Vipsanius Agrippa. If Augustus was the political mastermind shaping the new imperial system, Agrippa was his brilliant, indispensable right-hand man, a gifted general, a capable administrator, a personal friend, and eventually, his son-in-law. And in 33 BC, Agrippa held the office of aedile. Traditionally, aediles were responsible for maintaining temples, public buildings, streets, and overseeing markets and games. Agrippa, however, approached the role with characteristic energy and a vision amplified by the immense resources now available to Augustus's faction. He decided Rome's infrastructure, particularly its water system, needed a complete overhaul. Agrippa didn't just focus on building something new, he recognized the importance of the existing network. He undertook extensive, desperately needed repairs on the older aqueducts, the Appia, the Anio Vetus, and even the relatively younger Marcia. Channels were cleaned, leaks were plugged, structures were reinforced. Think of it as a massive, city-wide plumbing renovation. He famously even toured the Cloaca Maxima, Rome's main sewer, in a boat to inspect its condition and oversee its cleaning and expansion, a job you probably wouldn't volunteer for. This systematic approach to maintenance was crucial for ensuring the efficiency of the entire system. But Agrippa wasn't just about repairs. He was also a builder. In that same whirlwind year of 33 BC, Marcus Vipsanius Agrippa commissioned and financed the construction of a brand new aqueduct, the Aqua Julia. Named, of course, in honor of the Julian dynasty, Augustus's adopted family line tracing back to Julius Caesar. This was a statement of the new regime's power and commitment to the city. The Aqua Julia tapped springs located relatively close to the source of the Aqua Tepula, likely providing water of good quality, though perhaps not quite as legendarily cold as the Marcias. Here's where Agrippa's pragmatism and engineering savvy really showed. Instead of building an entirely separate structure for the Julia all the way into the city, he integrated it with the existing tepula. He essentially rebuilt and rerouted the tepula's final sections and constructed the Julia's channel to run directly into it, or more accurately, alongside and often directly above it. Frequently, both the tepula and Julia channels were piggybacked onto the same arcades already carrying the Aqua Marcia. Imagine looking up at some sections of the aqueduct near Rome and seeing a triple-decker structure, the Marcia on the bottom, the tepula above it, and the Julia perched on top, all flowing towards the city on shared arches. It was an efficient use of existing infrastructure, saving costs and space. This merging meant the waters physically mixed. The cooler spring water of the newly built Julia blended with the naturally warm water of the tepula. The resulting mix, flowing in the tepula's repurposed, and likely enlarged, channel, would have been cooler than the original tepula but probably still warmer than the Marcia or Julia water alone. This aqueduct cocktail then flowed into Rome at a reasonably high elevation, suitable for distribution across many districts. Why go to all this trouble? Water demand was skyrocketing, particularly for one specific purpose: public baths, thermae. Bathing was becoming an increasingly central part of Roman social life, and these complexes required enormous, continuous supplies of water. Agrippa himself was a major proponent of public bathing and was constructing his own magnificent baths of Agrippa near the Pantheon, the first of the grand imperial baths. The combined flow of the repaired older aqueducts and the new Julia/Tepula blend was essential to feed his ambitious building program and the city's growing bathing habit. What makes Agrippa's contribution even more remarkable is the scale of his personal investment. It's a well-attested quirky tidbit that Agrippa financed much of this vast program of repairs and new construction, including the entire Aqua Julia, largely out of his own pocket. His personal wealth, derived from military victories and shrewd management, was colossal, and he poured it into improving Rome. During his time as aedile, he also sponsored lavish games, distributed free salt and olive oil, and granted free access to Rome's hundreds of public baths for the entire year. It was an unparalleled display of civic munificence, certainly burnishing his and Augustus's popularity while also genuinely improving life for Roman citizens. He was acting, in effect, as the city's unofficial water commissioner, long before the formal office of curator aquarum was established by Augustus a few decades later. So, the period around 33 BC, driven by Agrippa's dynamism, marks another pivotal moment. It wasn't just about adding one new aqueduct, though the Julia was significant. It was about recognizing the water supply as a system requiring ongoing maintenance, strategic upgrades, and integrated planning. Agrippa repaired the old, built the new, and cleverly combined resources. The slightly odd Aqua Tepula, once a standalone warm water curiosity, found a new role as part of a blend, carried into the city on the shoulders of the mighty Marcia's arches alongside the politically potent Aqua Julia. This comprehensive overhaul ensured that as Rome transitioned fully into an empire under Augustus, its water supply was ready to meet the demands of the imperial capital, feeding the baths, fountains, and homes of what was rapidly becoming the largest city the world had ever seen. Agrippa's work ensured the water kept flowing, cleaner and more abundantly than ever before. Marcus Agrippa, having thoroughly refurbished Rome's existing water network and added the Aqua Julia blend to the mix, wasn't quite finished. His ambition for Rome, and perhaps his friendly competition with Augustus to beautify and improve the city, continued to drive him. His massive public works program in the Campus Martius, the ancient military drilling ground that was rapidly transforming into a stunning district of temples, public buildings, and leisure facilities, needed a dedicated, high-quality water supply. Chief among these projects were his magnificent baths, the first of the truly grand imperial thermae, and an adjacent artificial lake called the Stagnum Agrippi, used for recreation and possibly even mock naval skirmishes. These attractions required colossal amounts of water, delivered reliably to a relatively low-lying area of the city. So, Agrippa commissioned yet another aqueduct, his final masterpiece in hydroengineering, the Aqua Virgo, completed in 19 BC. The story behind its name is one of those charming legends that Romans seem to love attaching to their infrastructure. This is a quirky tidbit you might enjoy. The tale goes that Agrippa's engineers and soldiers were out searching for a suitable spring source, perhaps feeling rather hot and bothered under the Italian sun. They encountered a young local girl, a maiden, Virgo in Latin, who, instead of being intimidated, pointed them toward some hidden, pure spring she knew nearby. Whether this encounter actually happened or was a bit of clever PR to give the new aqueduct a memorable and auspicious name, we'll never know. But the name stuck, Aqua Virgo, the maiden's water. The springs themselves were located east of Rome, about 3 kilometers from the 8th milestone along the Via Latina. Critically, unlike the mountain springs feeding the Marcia, these were lower elevation springs, but they produced water of exceptional quality, very pure and refreshingly cold, rivaling the acclaimed Marcia. This made it perfect not just for filling baths but also for drinking. The engineering of the Aqua Virgo presents a fascinating contrast to the high-flying Aqua Marcia. While the Marcia used towering arcades to maintain its height over valleys, the Virgo took a much more modest approach. It runs for about 20 kilometers, around 12.5 miles. But almost its entire length is subterranean, buried beneath fields and, eventually, the increasingly dense suburbs of Rome. Only its final stretch within the city, traversing the Pincian Hill and reaching the Campus Martius, involved some arcading. Why the low, hidden path? The primary reason was its destination. The Campus Martius is a low-lying area. The Virgo didn't need to arrive high up like the Marcia, which aimed for the Capitoline Hill. By sourcing from lower springs and following a path that hugged the contours of the land or tunneled modestly, it could arrive precisely at the elevation required for Agrippa's baths and other nearby developments. Furthermore, historians debate whether this predominantly underground route was also chosen to minimize disruption in the increasingly populated areas east of Rome, where constructing large surface arcades might have been more complex and intrusive than it was for the Marcia over a century earlier. Perhaps even in the relative peace of the Augustan age, the Pax Romana, the old security concerns about keeping the water channel hidden hadn't entirely vanished. What makes the Aqua Virgo particularly remarkable from an engineering standpoint is its incredibly gentle gradient. Because its source wasn't dramatically higher than its destination, the slope of the channel had to be extremely slight, just a few centimeters drop for every 100 meters of length. Maintaining such a shallow, consistent slope over 20 kilometers required exceptionally precise surveying using instruments like the chorobates. Too steep, and the water would flow too fast, potentially damaging the channel. Too shallow, and it wouldn't flow reliably at all. It speaks volumes about the skill of Roman engineers that they could design and execute such a delicate hydraulic balancing act. Think about trying to get water to flow consistently across a kitchen counter that's barely tilted. Now imagine doing that accurately for 12.5 miles through varied terrain. The primary purpose of this meticulously engineered channel was clear: supplying the vast baths of Agrippa. This complex was a game-changer for Roman social life. Roman bathing wasn't just about getting clean, the thermae were sprawling complexes that served as community centers. You could bathe in pools of varying temperatures, from the cold frigidarium to the warm tepidarium and the hot caldarium, exercise in the palestra, gymnasium, relax in libraries or gardens. Socialize, conduct business meetings, grab a snack. They were central hubs of daily life, accessible to most social classes, often with low or no entry fees. Especially when subsidized by emperors or wealthy patrons like Agrippa. This bathing culture consumed staggering amounts of water. The pools needed constant replenishment. The heating systems, hypocausts running hot air under the floors, often used water, and the sheer number of visitors meant high demand. The Aqua Virgo, delivering its pure, cold stream directly to the Campus Martius, was the lifeline that made Agrippa's baths, and the lifestyle they represented, possible. It likely also fed the Stagnum Agrippi and numerous public fountains in the area, transforming the Campus Martius into a well-watered, vibrant part of the city. Perhaps the most astonishing thing about the Aqua Virgo is its longevity. While other aqueducts eventually fell into disrepair and were lost after the fall of the Western Roman Empire, the Virgo somehow endured. It was damaged and repaired multiple times throughout history, by emperors like Claudius, during the Gothic Wars, though seemingly restored quickly, and later by various popes during the Renaissance and Baroque periods. Its continuous, or near-continuous, operation over 2 millennia is unparalleled. In fact, a modernized version of the aqueduct, the Aqua Virgin, still follows much of the original Roman path and taps the same source springs. And where does this ancient water emerge today? Most famously, it feeds the spectacular Trevi Fountain, as well as the Barcaccia Fountain at the Spanish Steps and the Fountain of the Four Rivers in Piazza Navona. When you toss a coin into the Trevi Fountain, you're looking at water that has traveled much the same path Agrippa laid out over 2,000 years ago, a direct link to Rome's imperial past. The Aqua Virgo, then, stands as a testament to Agrippa's foresight and the skill of his engineers. It wasn't the longest or the highest, but it was perfectly suited to its task, delivering exceptionally high-quality water via a challenging low-gradient channel. It cemented the importance of the aqueducts in supporting the quintessential Roman bathing culture and left a legacy that, quite literally, still flows today. It was a fitting final contribution to Rome's water system from the man who had done more than anyone else to overhaul, expand, and manage this lifeblood of the city, ensuring that even the lower-lying districts could enjoy the benefits of clean, abundant water delivered right to their doorstep, or at least, to their local bathhouse. With Agrippa's death in 12 BC, the driving force behind Rome's recent aqueduct boom was gone. But the era of imperial construction and organization was just beginning, now under the sole careful guidance of Emperor Augustus himself. Having consolidated political power, Augustus turned much of his attention to transforming Rome into a worthy capital for his vast empire, famously boasting he found Rome a city of brick and left it a city of marble. This transformation wasn't just about grand temples and forums, it extended to the essential infrastructure that kept the enormous city alive and, importantly, entertained. Agrippa had laid incredible groundwork for the water system, but Augustus would build upon it, adding a unique, specialized aqueduct and, crucially, formalizing the management structure needed to maintain the entire network for the long haul. Around 2 BC, Augustus commissioned a new aqueduct, sometimes called the Aqua Alsiatina, sometimes the Aqua Augusta. Unlike the projects focused on delivering pure drinking or bathing water like the Marcia or Virgo, this one had a very different purpose, dictated by imperial spectacle. Its source was Lake Alsietinus, a sizable crater lake northwest of Rome, modern Lago di Martignano. Critically, the water from this lake wasn't considered suitable for drinking. It was likely somewhat brackish, certainly not the pure spring water Romans had come to expect from their best aqueducts. But for Augustus's intended purpose, purity wasn't the point. Sheer volume and availability were. The primary, stated reason for building the Aqua Alsiatina was to supply Augustus's Naumachia, an enormous artificial basin dug in the Trastevere district, across the Tiber River from the main city. What's a Naumachia? Imagine a purpose-built miniature lake, designed specifically for staging mock naval battles. These weren't small affairs. Here's a tidbit that gives you a sense of the scale. Augustus himself recorded that for one spectacle in the Naumachia, he pitted 30 large warships, replicas of biremes and triremes, against each other, crewed by an estimated 3,000 men, not counting the rowers. It was the ancient equivalent of a blockbuster action movie, live action, with real, or convincingly simulated, naval combat, put on for the entertainment of the Roman populace. Filling such a massive basin, estimates suggest it might have been hundreds of meters long and wide, required a dedicated, high-volume water source. And the slightly subpar quality of Lake Alcietina's water simply didn't matter for floating replica warships and entertaining the masses. Talk about bread and circuses, Augustus was providing the water for the circuses quite literally. Given its non-potable nature, the Aqua Alcietina's water wasn't integrated into the main drinking water distribution system. Its 33-kilometer, 20-mile, channel, likely mostly subterranean, delivered water at a relatively low elevation suitable for filling the basin in Trastevere. Its secondary uses were probably limited to irrigating the extensive gardens, horti, that wealthy Romans were establishing in the Trastevere area, and perhaps occasionally being used to help flush major drains or sewers if needed, but you certainly wouldn't be filling your cup from a fountain fed by the Alciatina. Its existence highlights the increasing specialization of the Roman water system. Specific aqueducts could now be built for non-potable, large-volume needs, freeing up the high-quality sources for drinking and bathing. Historians still debate the exact dimensions and mechanics of Augustus's Naumachia, pondering how quickly it could be filled and drained, and whether the Alciatina truly had any significant regular function beyond supplying the basin and perhaps some nearby irrigation, given its quality and low pressure. Perhaps even more significant than this specialized aqueduct, however, were the administrative reforms Augustus implemented to manage Rome's increasingly complex water network. Agrippa had acted with immense personal authority and resources, but Augustus recognized the need for a permanent, professionalized system. Around 11 BC, though the process likely began earlier, perhaps formalizing roles Agrippa already played, he established the office of curator aquarum. This wasn't just one person but typically a board of 3 high-ranking senators, appointed by the emperor, who were given overall responsibility for the aqueducts and the entire water distribution system. These curators had broad authority to oversee maintenance, manage budgets, enforce regulations, and ensure the smooth operation of this vital public service. The famous water commissioner Frontinus, whose writings provide so much detail about the aqueducts, held this prestigious position much later, in the late 1st century AD. Crucially, Augustus also ensured the creation of a dedicated, permanent workforce to handle the day-to-day operations and maintenance. Agrippa had bequeathed his own large team of trained slaves to Augustus upon his death, and Augustus supplemented this group, creating the first Familia Aquaria, the official water workforce. This team, eventually comprising hundreds of skilled imperial slaves and freedmen, included surveyors, pipe fitters, masons, inspectors, aquarii, and laborers. They patrolled the aqueduct lines, cleared sediment from channels and settling tanks, repaired leaks, replaced worn sections, maintained fountains and distribution tanks, castella, and crucially, tried to prevent illegal tapping of the water lines, a perennial problem as unscrupulous individuals tried to get free water by punching unauthorized holes into the channels or pipes. This professionalization extended to regulations. Standardized sizes for pipes, fistulae, and nozzles, calices, were established to better control and measure water distribution. Lead pipes carrying water to private consumers were often required to be stamped with the owner's name and information about the grant, helping officials track usage and crack down on fraud. Frontinus later meticulously documented the discharge capacities of each aqueduct and the allocated amounts, showcasing a system striving for quantitative management. These Augustan administrative reforms were fundamental. They transformed Rome's water supply from a series of impressive but perhaps ad hoc projects into a managed public utility, with clear lines of authority, dedicated personnel, and codified procedures. This organizational structure was just as important as the physical engineering in ensuring Rome's long-term water security. It was part of Augustus's broader genius for creating stable institutions that would allow the empire, and its capital city, to function effectively for centuries. The aqueducts weren't just built. They were managed, maintained, and regulated within a sophisticated administrative framework, ensuring that the lifeblood of Rome continued to flow reliably, whether it was the pure cold water of the Virgo for the baths or the murky lake water of the Alciatina for staging spectacular naval battles. Augustus understood that imperial power rested not just on legions and marble temples, but on the less glamorous, essential foundations of well-managed infrastructure. Augustus had brought stability and a crucial administrative framework to Rome's water system, ensuring its smooth operation. But the city, the beating heart of a now vast and secure empire, just kept growing. Throughout the reigns of his successors like Tiberius, the demand for water continued its relentless upward trend. More people, more luxurious homes with private connections, ever more elaborate public baths, and countless fountains all put a strain on the existing network. Even with Agrippa's additions and Augustus's management, by the mid-1st century AD, Rome was thirsty again. It was time for another quantum leap in water supply, one that would dwarf previous efforts in scale and sheer audacity. Around AD 38, the notoriously unpredictable Emperor Caligula initiated not one, but two enormous aqueduct projects simultaneously. It's a curious historical tidbit. Caligula is often remembered for his alleged cruelty, eccentricities, and extravagance, like appointing his horse as consul, though that's likely an exaggeration. Yet, amidst these stories, he also launched two of the most significant and practical infrastructure projects Rome had seen, aimed directly at improving the lives of its citizens. Perhaps even emperors known for erratic behavior understood the fundamental political importance of keeping the water flowing. Or maybe, for Caligula, commissioning aqueducts grander than anything before was just another form of imperial megalomania, a way to leave an indelible mark on the city. Whatever his motivation, his reign was cut short by assassination in AD 41, leaving the completion of these colossal projects to his unlikely successor, his uncle Claudius. Claudius, often underestimated due to a physical disability, possibly cerebral palsy, and a scholarly awkwardness, proved to be a surprisingly effective administrator. He saw the aqueduct projects through. And in AD 52, both the Aqua Claudia and the Aqua Annio Novus were officially inaugurated, bringing a deluge of fresh water into Rome. These weren't just minor additions. They were monumental undertakings that represented the peak of Roman aqueduct engineering in terms of scale and grandeur. Let's look at the Aqua Claudia first. True to the Roman penchant for seeking out the best sources, its water came from two superb springs, the Carololius and Curtius, located near the source springs of the highly regarded Aqua Marcia. This guaranteed water of exceptional quality, clear, pure, and cool, almost rivaling the Marcia itself. The Claudia ran for about 69 kilometers, around 43 miles, much of it underground. But its final approach to Rome involved some of the most impressive arcades yet built. It arrived in the city at a high elevation, capable of serving the Palatine Hill and other lofty districts. Alongside it flowed the Aqua Annio Novus, the New Annio. As the name suggests, this was another attempt to harness the vast quantities of water available from the Annio River, the source of the older, often murky Annio Vetus. To try and get cleaner water this time, Roman engineers went much further upstream, tapping the river high in the mountains near Subiaco, well beyond Tivoli. They also constructed a settling basin, Piscina Limaria, near the intake, hoping to clarify the water before it even began its long journey. This aqueduct was the highest of all Rome's water channels where it entered the city, and at approximately 87 kilometers, about 54 miles, it was arguably the longest. Although it may have incorporated parts of earlier, unfinished channels. Critically, the Annio Novus was designed to deliver the largest volume of water of any single Roman aqueduct, significantly boosting the city's total supply. The engineering required for both these aqueducts, especially in their final 10 to 15 kilometers across the Roman Campagna, was breathtaking. To maintain their necessary height for delivery within the city, they had to be carried on arcades far taller and more imposing than even those of the Marcia. Some arches reached heights of over 30 meters, nearly 100 feet. Building these towering structures required immense skill in foundation engineering, stone cutting, and mortar work. Imagine the logistical challenge of quarrying, transporting, and lifting massive stone blocks to such heights, all using human and animal power, levers, and wooden scaffolding. Often, to save space and cost, these two mighty aqueducts shared the same substructure, running one atop the other on the same set of arches. The Aqua Claudia flowed in the lower channel, with the Aqua Annio Novis directly above it. Picture this double-decker river of stone marching across the landscape, a truly monumental statement of imperial power and capability. The most famous surviving monument associated with these aqueducts is the Porta Maggiore, larger gate, in Rome. Originally, this wasn't a city gate in the defensive sense. It was a magnificent double archway built precisely where the Aqua Claudia and Aqua Annio Novis crossed two major roads, the Via Prenestina and Via Labicana. The channels were carried in the attic story above the arches. When Emperor Aurelian built his new defensive walls around Rome over 2 centuries later, AD 271 to 275, he cleverly incorporated this already massive structure into the circuit. The attic of the Porta Maggiore still bears proud inscriptions, placed by Claudius, commemorating his achievement, Ti. Clavdivs Drvcf, Caesar Avstvs Germanicus Pontiff. Maxim. /Tribnitia Potstate 12 Cos. V Imperator 27 Pater Patrii /Aquas Clavdium ex Fontivs 1 Qvi Vocabant Verkervlevs Edic Fertivs a Miliario 35 /Idem Aninum Novum a Miliario 62 Sva Impensa in Verbem Perdsendas 2 Cravit. Basically, Tiberius Claudius brought the waters of the Claudia from the springs Carololius and Curtius at the 35th milestone, and also the Annio Novis from the 62nd milestone, into the city at his own expense. Claudius made sure everyone knew who finished the job, even if Caligula started it. However, while the Claudia delivered beautifully pure water, the Annio Novis, despite the engineer's best efforts, still suffered from the old Annio problem, turbidity. Sourcing the water much further upstream and including a settling basin helped, but didn't entirely solve it. Frontinus, writing decades later, noted that the Annio Novis water was often cloudy, especially after rain, and advised that it should ideally be allowed to settle further in the city's distribution tanks, castella, before being delivered to the public, or mixed with cleaner sources. Historians debate why the initial settling basin at Subiaco wasn't more effective. Perhaps it was undersized for the river's flow, poorly maintained, or simply unable to cope with the fine silt carried by the Annio during floods. It wasn't until Emperor Trajan undertook major works over 50 years later, drawing water from the river via 3 artificial lakes near Subiaco which acted as giant settling ponds, that the Annio Novis water quality was significantly and reliably improved. So Claudius got credit for one pristine aqueduct and one that was incredibly voluminous but still needed filtering, regardless of the Annio Novis's initial quality quirks. The combined impact of these two Claudian giants was transformative. They massively increased the total volume of water flowing into Rome, potentially doubling the existing supply. The Annio Novis alone became the city's largest single source of water. This huge influx enabled the construction of even more lavish imperial baths, supported countless fountains, allowed more private citizens to obtain connections, and underpinned the health and sanitation of Rome as it reached its peak population, estimated by some to be over 1 million inhabitants. The Aqua Claudia and Aqua Annio Novis represent the zenith of Roman aqueduct construction in terms of sheer scale and architectural grandeur, a fitting liquid legacy for the heart of a world empire. The Claudian aqueducts, the Claudia and Annio Novis, represented a high water mark, quite literally, flooding Rome with an unprecedented volume of water by AD 52. You might think the story pauses there, that Rome finally had enough H2O to satisfy even its most demanding bathers and fountain enthusiasts. For a while, perhaps, the focus shifted. With such massive trunk lines pouring water into the city at high elevations, the next logical steps involved refining the distribution network and addressing the needs of specific areas or projects that still weren't adequately served, even amidst this abundance. Enter two emperors known for leaving their mark on Rome's landscape, albeit in very different ways, Nero and Trajan. First, let's talk about Nero. His reign, AD 54 to 68, is famously associated with the Great Fire of Rome in AD 64, which devastated large parts of the city. In the fire's aftermath, Nero seized a vast tract of cleared land right in the heart of Rome to build his spectacular, sprawling palace complex, the Domus Aurea, or Golden House. This place was the definition of opulence. A quirky tidbit of imperial excess ***, it reportedly included not just gilded and jewel-encrusted rooms but also parks, vineyards, pastures, an artificial lake, the Stagnum Neronis, and even a colossal statue of Nero himself. It was less a house and more a private countryside estate dropped into the middle of the capital. Such a complex. Along with the wealthy residents rebuilding their villas on the higher hills like the Celian, demanded a reliable supply of high-quality water. Nero's solution wasn't a completely new aqueduct from source to city, but rather a clever and visually striking extension of the existing Aqua Claudia. He commissioned a major branch, known as the Arcus Neroniani or sometimes the Arcus Kilomontani, to carry the Claudia's pure, high-level water across the valley between the Palatine and Celian hills. This branch served the temples and residences on the Celian hill and, crucially, fed the extravagant water features and needs of his Domus Aurea complex below. What made these Neronian arches stand out was their construction. Instead of the massive, solid stone blocks often used in earlier arcades like the Marcia or Claudia, Nero's engineers employed brick-faced concrete. This allowed for taller, more slender, and arguably more elegant arches. Seeing them stride across the cityscape must have been impressive, a testament perhaps to Neronian aesthetics, or simply reflecting advances in concrete technology that allowed for more refined structures. This branch effectively extended the reach of one of Rome's best water sources to the highest parts of the city and Nero's personal playground. Ironically, the Domus Aurea itself proved so unpopular. Seen as a symbol of Nero's self-indulgence at the city's expense, that after his death, subsequent emperors deliberately built over it. Vespasian started the Colosseum on the site of the artificial lake, and Trajan later built his own massive baths right on top of part of the palace structure. The aqueduct branch, however, continued to serve the Celian hill long after the Golden House was gone. Fast forward a few decades, past the turmoil of the year of the four emperors and the solidifying rule of the Flavian dynasty, Vespasian, Titus, Domitian, and you arrive at the reign of Trajan, AD 98 to 117. Often ranked among Rome's 5 good emperors, Trajan was known for his military successes, his extensive public building programs, and his competent administration, a stark contrast to Nero's reputation. Trajan took a serious interest in Rome's water supply. As mentioned before, it was under Trajan that the persistent turbidity issues of the Annio Novus were finally and effectively addressed. By creating large settling basins, essentially artificial lakes, near the intake at Subiaco, he ensured that even the mighty Annio River could be tamed into providing consistently clearer water. A major engineering feat that solved a century-old problem. But Trajan didn't stop at fixing existing lines. He recognized that one major district of Rome was still relatively underserved with high-quality water, Trastevere, from Latin transtiberem, meaning, across the Tiber. This bustling, populous district on the west bank of the Tiber had grown significantly. While Augustus's Aqua Alsietina supplied some water for non-potable uses like the Naumachia and irrigation, and some water was likely piped across the bridges from the main city network, Trastevere lacked its own dedicated, high-quality aqueduct. Trajan decided to remedy this. In AD 109, Trajan inaugurated the Aqua Traiana, a completely new aqueduct built specifically with Trastevere in mind. Showing strategic thinking, his engineers looked northwest of the city, a different direction from the eastern sources of the Anio and Marcia systems. They tapped a collection of abundant springs bubbling up near the shores of Lake Bracciano, known in antiquity as Lacus Sabatinus. These springs provided water that was clear, clean, and plentiful, excellent quality for both drinking and bathing. The Aqua Triana ran for approximately 57 kilometers, about 35 miles, towards Rome. Its construction likely benefited from the highly developed Roman concrete technology of the period, allowing for efficient building of both its underground channels and the necessary arcades where the terrain dictated. It arrived in Rome at a high enough elevation to serve the Janiculum Hill, the ridge that rises behind Trastevere, before distributing water throughout the lower-lying district. Its primary purpose was clear: to give the residents and businesses of Trastevere a dedicated, reliable source of excellent water, dramatically improving their amenities. It also fed Trajan's own magnificent baths, constructed on the Appian Hill back across the river, partially over the ruins of Nero's Domus Aurea, a symbolic reclaiming of the land for public use. This project stands as a mainstream historical fact signifying continued imperial investment in essential infrastructure during Rome's peak. The exact path and distribution network of the Aqua Triana within the city, particularly in Trastevere, remain subjects of study. There is ongoing scholarly debate and archaeological investigation trying to pinpoint its precise terminal castella, distribution tanks, and confirm hypotheses, for instance, about whether it directly powered the complex of water mills that are known to have existed on the slopes of the Janiculum Hill, using its flow to grind grain for the city. So, the period after the Claudian boom saw important developments. Nero, driven by personal luxury and the needs of the city's elite, extended the reach of existing high-quality water with aesthetically refined engineering. Trajan, the pragmatic and popular emperor, took a broader view, fixing the flaws in a major existing aqueduct, Anio Novus, and building an entirely new one, Aqua Triana, to serve a specific, underserved district with high-quality water sourced from a completely different region. These actions demonstrate the maturity of the Roman water system. It wasn't just about adding bulk anymore, but about targeted improvements, quality control, and ensuring equitable distribution, at least by Roman standards, across the sprawling metropolis. The emperors understood that maintaining and strategically expanding the water supply was fundamental to the health, prosperity, and political stability of their capital. Trajan's Aqua Triana, dedicated in AD 109, represented a significant, targeted addition to Rome's water supply, ensuring the bustling Trastevere district received the high-quality water it needed. Following Trajan, emperors like Hadrian, famous for his wall in Britain and his villa at Tivoli, which itself had complex waterworks, and the Antonines, Antoninus Pius, Marcus Aurelius, oversaw a period often considered the empire's golden age. While they undoubtedly funded repairs and maintained the existing aqueduct system, a constant necessity, the drive to build entirely new, massive trunk lines bringing water from distant sources seemed to wane somewhat after Trajan. Perhaps the existing network, boosted by the Claudian giants and Trajan's additions and improvements, was finally deemed sufficient for the city's peak needs. However, the story of Rome's great aqueduct construction has one final chapter. Fast forward over a century from the Aqua Triana. Past the reign of the philosopher Emperor Marcus Aurelius, the instability under his son Commodus, and the turbulent Severan dynasty, arriving in the early 3rd century AD. The emperor on the throne now is Alexander Severus, who ruled from AD 222 to 235. He came to power exceptionally young, barely a teenager, following the chaotic reigns of Elagabalus and Caracalla. It's a relevant quirky tidbit that his reign was heavily guided, especially initially, by his capable mother, Julia Avida Mamaea, and his grandmother, Julia Misa. These experienced imperial women likely influenced his efforts to present himself as a responsible, traditional emperor, focused on justice, military discipline, and, importantly, civic benefactions in the mold of the good emperors like Trajan. One of Alexander Severus's significant contributions to Rome's infrastructure was the Aqua Alexandrina, the last of the great imperial aqueducts built specifically for the city, inaugurated in AD 226. Compared to the Claudian behemoths or the far-reaching Marcia and Triana, the Alexandrina was a more modest undertaking, but still a substantial project. Its source was a group of springs located in the Pantano Borghese area, about 22 kilometers, roughly 14 miles, east of Rome along the Via Prenestina. The water quality was reportedly good, suitable for bathing and other uses. The aqueduct itself was constructed primarily using brick-faced concrete, particularly for its above-ground sections which consisted of elegant, relatively slender arches carrying the channel across the final kilometers towards the city. While functional and visually appealing, historians sometimes debate whether the execution of the brickwork on the Alexandrina shows the same level of meticulous craftsmanship or perhaps used slightly less high-quality materials compared to the peak imperial periods like the Trajanic or even Neronian eras. This isn't to say it was poorly built, it functioned for centuries, but these subtle differences might hint at the emerging economic pressures and perhaps shifting resource allocation priorities of the 3rd century AD. A period that would soon plunge into crisis. The specific purpose driving the construction of the Aqua Alexandrina was to supply a major bath complex in the heart of the Campus Martius. These were originally the baths of Nero, located near Agrippa's older baths and the Pantheon. Alexander Severus undertook a major renovation and expansion of these Neronian baths, likely damaged by fire or simply needing modernization, and then rededicated them in his own name as the Thermae Alexandrini, Baths of Alexander. Providing a dedicated new water source was essential for ensuring the revitalized complex could operate reliably and lavishly, serving the dense population of central Rome. Building or refurbishing baths and ensuring their water supply remained a key way for emperors to gain popular favor, even in the 3rd century. The Alexandrina stands as a mainstream fact marking the final major addition to Rome's aqueduct network. With the completion of the Aqua Alexandrina, Rome's water supply system reached its absolute peak. Count them, 11 major aqueducts were now converging on the city from various directions: Appia, Annio Vetus, Marcia, Tepula, Julia, Virgo, Alciatina, Claudia, Annio Novus, Triana, and Alexandrina. Together, they poured hundreds of thousands, perhaps even over 1 million cubic meters, hundreds of millions of gallons, of water into Rome every single day. An astonishing volume, supplying innumerable fountains, hundreds of private connections, dozens of public latrines, various industrial needs, and of course, the 11 or so major imperial bath complexes plus hundreds of smaller neighborhood baths, balnei. The engineering and administrative system required to keep this vast network flowing was arguably one of ancient Rome's greatest achievements. And this achievement wasn't confined to the capital. The technology and expertise developed for Rome's aqueducts were replicated across the empire, wherever Roman legions marched and administrators settled. They brought with them the knowledge of surveying, channel construction, arcade building, and water management. From the soaring arches of the Pont du Gard supplying Nîmes in southern Gaul, France, to the remarkably preserved aqueduct of Segovia in Spain, the tunnels feeding Caesarea Maritima's port in Judea, Israel, and countless others in North Africa, Asia Minor, and across Europe, Roman aqueducts became symbols of Romanization, bringing the benefits of clean, abundant water, and enabling the characteristic Roman urban lifestyle in cities far from the capital. Rome provided the blueprint, and the empire followed suit. Back in Rome itself, however, the Aqua Alexandrina marked the end of an era. No further large-scale aqueducts were built for the city after AD 226. Why? The reasons are likely complex. The sheer cost of such massive undertakings may have become prohibitive as the empire faced mounting military expenses and the economic turmoil known as the crisis of the 3rd century later in Alexander's reign and after his death. Political instability meant emperors often had shorter reigns and more pressing concerns than long-term infrastructure projects. Perhaps, also, the existing 11 aqueducts were finally deemed truly sufficient, maybe even excessive, for the city's needs, especially if Rome's population began to stabilize or even decline in later centuries. This cessation of new building didn't mean the system stopped functioning. Maintenance was perpetual and essential. The curators Aquarum and the Familia Aquaria continued their vital work, patching leaks, clearing channels, and managing distribution. But the grand vision of reaching ever further, building ever higher, adding ever more volume, that chapter closed with the Aqua Alexandrina. It stands as the final flourish, a testament to the enduring importance of water in Roman life. Built just before the empire entered a period of profound challenge and transformation. The system was complete, the challenge now would be to maintain it against the tides of time and history. Alright, we've journeyed through centuries of aqueduct construction, from the modest subterranean Aqua Appia to the towering arches of the Claudia and the final flourish of the Alexandrina. We've seen Rome's water network grow into a sprawling, complex system. But how, exactly, did they pull it off? Forget magic wands or alien intervention, this was human ingenuity, meticulous planning, and back-breaking labor on an epic scale. Let's peek behind the curtain at the engineering genius that made these water-bearing marvels possible. The absolute, non-negotiable heart of Roman aqueduct design was gravity. No pumps, no siphons, at least not typically on the main lines. Just the relentless pull of the earth guiding water from a high source to a lower destination, sometimes over dozens of miles. This meant the entire system relied on establishing and maintaining a precise, gentle, continuous downward slope, a process the Romans called libratio. Too steep, and the water's velocity could erode the channel or cause overflows; too flat, and the flow would become sluggish or stagnant. Roman engineers typically aimed for remarkably shallow gradients, often dropping only a few meters in elevation for every kilometer of length, a mainstream fact reflecting their mastery of leveling. We're talking slopes ranging roughly from 1,300, about 30 centimeters drop per kilometer, to perhaps 1,200, 5 meters per kilometer, depending on terrain and design needs. Achieving this over vast distances, across hills and valleys, required sophisticated surveying techniques for the time. Their primary tool for leveling was the chorobates. Imagine a sturdy wooden plank, perhaps 6 meters, 20 feet, long, with supporting legs at each end and vertical rules marked with lines. Critically, it had either a groove carved into the top surface that could be filled with water to act as a spirit level, or plumb bobs hanging from the top edge that would align with specific marks on the vertical rules when the plank was perfectly horizontal. By sighting along the top of a leveled chorobates towards a graduated staff held by an assistant further along the proposed route, surveyors could measure differences in elevation and painstakingly plot a course that maintained the desired gentle slope. It was slow, meticulous work, requiring patience and a good eye. For measuring angles, especially vertical angles needed for sighting across valleys or planning tunnels, they might have used a dioptra. This was a more complex instrument, sometimes involving adjustable geared discs and water levels, allowing for more precise angular measurements than simple sighting devices. While the basic right angles needed for laying out Roman roads or military camps were often marked using a simpler tool called a groma, a cross-shaped staff with plumb lines, the subtle angles and precise leveling for aqueducts likely relied more heavily on the chorobates and dioptra. Now, historians and engineers still debate the exact level of theoretical mathematical knowledge versus practical, experience-based skill employed by Roman surveyors. Did they use complex trigonometry to calculate curves and trajectories, or did they rely more on empirical methods, careful measurement, And well-honed rules of thumb passed down through generations of engineers? The results speak for themselves, suggesting a highly effective blend of practical know-how and sufficient theoretical understanding. Once the route was plotted, construction began, adapting to the terrain. Where the aqueduct crossed relatively flat ground near the required elevation, the Romans often used the cut-and-cover method. Workers would dig a trench, build the stone or concrete water channel within it, and then cover the channel over with earth, restoring the ground surface above. Simple, effective, and kept the channel protected underground. When hills or mountains stood in the way, tunneling was necessary. Roman engineers were adept miners and tunnelers. They would often sink vertical shafts, called pudii or lumina, at regular intervals, perhaps every 30 to 60 meters, along the tunnel's planned route. These shafts served multiple purposes. They provided ventilation for the workers digging below, allowed removal of excavated rock and soil using winches or hoists, gave access points for construction crews to work on multiple sections of the tunnel simultaneously, speeding up the process, and later served as inspection and maintenance hatches. Digging was done by hand, using iron picks, wedges, and hammers. Lighting came from smoky oil lamps. It was dark, cramped, dangerous work, especially when encountering hard rock or unexpected groundwater flooding. Of course, the most visually stunning features were the arcades, the bridges carrying the water channel high across valleys and plains. Building these required immense skill. First, solid foundations had to be laid for the piers, sometimes involving driving wooden piles deep into marshy ground or excavating down to bedrock. Then the piers themselves were built upwards, often using sturdy stone blocks for the outer facing and a core filled with Roman concrete. Once two piers reached the required height, a temporary wooden framework, called centering, was erected between them, shaped precisely to the curve of the intended arch. Skilled masons would then carefully lay the wedge-shaped stones, called voussoirs, over the centering, working from both sides towards the middle. The final, central stone placed at the apex was the keystone, locking all the other voussoirs tightly into place through compression. Once the mortar set, the wooden centering could be carefully removed, leaving the stone arch supporting itself, and eventually, the weight of the water channel built on top. This process was repeated, arch by arch, pier by pier, sometimes for miles. The choice of materials was crucial. Locally available stone was often preferred for cost and practicality. Volcanic tuff, common around Rome, was relatively easy to cut but less durable. Limestone and travertine were harder, stronger stones often used for key structural elements like arches or facing. Stone blocks were meticulously cut and fitted, ashlar masonry, for channel linings or arcade facings. But the secret weapon in the Roman construction arsenal was undoubtedly opus cementitium, Roman concrete. This wasn't like modern Portland cement concrete. Roman concrete typically consisted of an aggregate, rubble, stones, broken tiles, the cimenta, mixed with a mortar made from lime, water, and, crucially, pozzolana. Pozzolana was a type of volcanic ash found abundantly near Naples, originally near Puteoli, hence the name, and also in other volcanic regions around Rome. This ash contained silica and alumina, which react chemically with calcium hydroxide, from the lime, in the presence of water. This pozzolanic reaction created exceptionally strong, durable, and water-resistant binder compounds. Unlike simple lime mortar which hardens by drying, pozzolanic concrete could harden even underwater, making it ideal for bridges, harbors, and, of course, aqueducts. It allowed Romans to build larger, stronger, and more complex structures faster and often with less skilled labor than relying purely on precisely cut stone. Piers, vaults, and structural cores were often made of opus cementitium, sometimes faced with stone or brick for appearance and protection, to ensure the channels themselves were watertight. The Romans developed a special hydraulic mortar called opus signinum. This involved mixing lime mortar with crushed terracotta tiles or pottery shards. The fine ceramic particles not only reduced porosity but also added some pozzolanic reactivity, resulting in a hard, smooth, waterproof lining ideal for containing the constant flow of water and preventing leaks. As a little practical tidbit, Romans sometimes carved small depressions or settling pits directly into the opus signinum lining at the bottom of the channel at intervals. These tiny traps would catch fine grit that escaped the main settling tanks, making it easier for maintenance crews to scoop out sediment without having to meticulously scrape the entire channel. Within the city, water distribution relied heavily on lead pipes, fistulae. Lead, plumbum in Latin, giving us the word plumbing, was relatively abundant, malleable, and easy to work. Sheets of lead were rolled around a wooden form and soldered shut along the seam to create pipes of varying standard diameters. While concerns about lead poisoning are valid, the extent of the risk in Roman times is debated. The water in many Roman aqueducts was quite hard, rich in calcium carbonate, which would quickly coat the inside of the pipes with mineral scale, reducing the water's contact with the lead. High flow rates also limited contact time. Nonetheless, it remains a point of discussion among historians. Terracotta pipes were also used, especially for smaller lines or where lead was less available or desirable. Finally, none of this would have happened without people, vast numbers of people. Highly skilled engineers and surveyors planned the routes. Quarry workers extracted and roughly shaped the stone. Masons cut blocks with precision and laid arches. Carpenters built and moved the heavy wooden centering. Legions of unskilled laborers, slaves, conscripts, or sometimes soldiers during peacetime, dug the trenches and tunnels, hauled materials, mixed mortar, and lifted heavy loads. Overseers kept the work coordinated. The logistics of feeding, housing, and equipping these workforces, often operating far from the city, were immense. Building an aqueduct wasn't just an engineering challenge, it was a massive organizational undertaking, a testament to Roman power, resources, and their ability to mobilize and manage human labor on an industrial scale for the ancient world. So, you've seen how Roman engineers, armed with tools like the chorobates and materials like ingenious pozzolanic concrete, could construct these incredible aqueducts, marching them across miles of countryside to deliver water to Rome. But building them, as monumental a task as that was only half the battle. An aqueduct isn't a static monument like a temple or a triumphal arch, it's a dynamic system, constantly under stress from flowing water, weather, geology, and human interference. Keeping these vital arteries flowing reliably for centuries required a sophisticated system of administration and relentless, ongoing maintenance. Think of it less like building a house and more like keeping a high-performance machine running smoothly, day in, day out. The administrative foundation for this was laid by Augustus, as we saw, with the establishment of the curators aquarum, the water commissioners. This wasn't just one person, but typically a board of 3 high-ranking senators, usually ex-consuls, appointed by the emperor. Their role was oversight and management at the highest level, setting policy, managing the substantial budgets allocated for maintenance and operations, interpreting laws related to water rights and usage, authorizing new connections, and generally ensuring the entire system functioned for the benefit of Rome. They were the ultimate bosses of the waterworks, wielding considerable authority. We know an astonishing amount about how this system worked, thanks largely to one man, Sextus Julius Frontinus. A respected senator, military general, he'd served as governor of Britain, an engineer in his own right. Frontinus was appointed curator aquarum by Emperor Nerva around AD 97. He tackled the job with the dedication and methodical approach you might expect from a former general. And, uniquely for a Roman administrator, he wrote a detailed, 2-volume report about his work. De Aqueductu Urbis Romi, on the water supply of the city of Rome. This book is a goldmine, providing unparalleled insight into the practicalities of managing Rome's water. Frontinus meticulously inventoried the aqueducts, calculated their capacities, though his methods are sometimes debated by modern scholars, documented their history, detailed the complex system of grants and distribution, and, crucially, exposed the numerous problems he encountered, especially mismanagement and widespread water theft, and the reforms he implemented. Reading Frontinus gives you a real sense of a dedicated public servant grappling with the immense responsibility of keeping a metropolis alive with water. Supporting the curators was the essential workforce, the Familia Aquaria. This was a large, specialized team, initially formed from slaves Agrippa had trained and bequeathed to Augustus. Later maintained and expanded as part of the imperial household staff. By Frontinus's time, it numbered in the hundreds. He mentions two main teams, one public, established by Augustus, numbering around 240, and one imperial, added by Claudius, numbering 460. These weren't just unskilled laborers. The Familia Aquaria included specialized roles, villici, overseers, castellarii, keepers of the distribution tanks, circuitors, linewalkers or inspectors, silicarii, pavers, tectors, plasterers/masons, and other technicians skilled in pipe fitting, masonry, and hydraulics. They were the trained hands and watchful eyes ensuring the system's physical integrity. Funded primarily by the imperial treasury, this permanent, skilled workforce was absolutely vital. Their tasks were endless. Regular inspection tours, circuitiones, were crucial. Inspectors would walk the lines, examining visible sections of arcades and channels, and using the vertical shafts, pudii, to descend into underground tunnels with lamps, checking for cracks, leaks, blockages, or signs of illegal tapping. Cleaning was a major, recurring chore. Roman water, especially from river sources like the Anio, carried silt that could settle in channels. More significantly, the hard water, rich in dissolved calcium carbonate, limestone, would gradually precipitate out, forming thick, rock-hard deposits of sinter or travertine scale on the inside surfaces of the channels. This sinter buildup could drastically reduce the channel's capacity over time, sometimes choking the flow almost entirely. Periodically, sections of an aqueduct had to be shut down, diverting water if possible, or simply cutting off supply temporarily, so that crews could go in with hammers and chisels and laboriously chip away the accumulated scale. Imagine crawling through a dark, damp channel, chipping away at what was essentially rock. It was tough, unpleasant work, but essential for maintaining flow rates. Settling tanks, piscini, also needed regular draining and mucking out. Repairs were constant. Cracks in the waterproof opus signum lining needed patching to prevent leaks. Masonry on piers and arches might need repointing or reinforcement, especially after minor earth tremors or settlement. Sections of lead pipe could corrode or break. Tree roots could invade channels, frost could damage structures in winter. The Familia Aquaria needed the skills and materials constantly ready to address these issues promptly. Leaks were an unavoidable headache, a constant drain on the system's efficiency. But an even bigger problem, one that clearly infuriated the methodical Frontinus, was water theft. It's a fascinating and rather quirky tidbit from his book. He rails against the widespread practice of illegal tapping. Farmers whose land the aqueducts crossed would secretly puncture the channels, puncti, to irrigate their fields. Landowners and even officials within the city would bribe watermen to install unauthorized pipes, fistulae, or to fit existing pipes with wider gauge nozzles, calices, than they were entitled to, effectively stealing water pressure and volume from the public supply. Frontinus describes finding illicit pipes hidden everywhere, running concealed behind walls, buried under pavements, diverting water before it even reached the official measuring devices at the distribution tanks. He estimated that the amount of water being stolen was enormous, perhaps almost as much as was being legally delivered. His reforms included meticulously remeasuring intakes and deliveries, standardizing pipe sizes and nozzles, ensuring all licensed pipes were clearly stamped with the owner's name and the details of the grant, and cracking down on corrupt watermen. He was, in essence, Rome's determined water police chief. Of course, historians debate just how successful Frontinus's crackdown ultimately was. Given the scale of the city, the length of the aqueduct lines, hundreds of miles in total, and the enduring temptation of free water, it's likely that illegal tapping, while perhaps reduced for a time, remained a persistent challenge throughout the aqueduct's history. Enforcement across such a vast system must have been incredibly difficult. Other regulations aimed to protect the aqueducts themselves. Laws prohibited building structures or planting trees within a certain distance, often around 15 feet, on either side of the aqueduct lines, ensuring access for maintenance crews and preventing roots or structural pressures from damaging the channels or foundations. Keeping this whole system running, paying the salaries of the Familia Aquaria, purchasing materials for repairs, funding major reinforcement projects, required substantial, continuous funding. This came primarily from the imperial treasury, managed by the curators. Some revenue might have been generated from fees charged for private water grants or fines levied for infractions. But maintaining the aqueducts was largely seen as a core responsibility and expense of the state, essential for the well-being and stability of the capital. So, while the soaring arches and vast tunnels represent the visible glory of Roman aqueducts, their true longevity relied just as much on the unglamorous, essential work of administration and maintenance. It depended on the meticulous records and firm hand of officials like Frontinus, the skills of the hundreds of workers in the Familia Aquaria constantly inspecting, cleaning, and repairing, and the legal and financial frameworks established to manage this vital resource. Without this constant vigilance and effort, the rivers flowing through stone would have quickly faltered and died. So, you've got 11 massive aqueducts, like great artificial rivers, finally arriving at the edges of Rome after journeys of many miles. They've been surveyed with painstaking precision, built with incredible engineering skill, and kept flowing through constant maintenance and vigilance. But the journey isn't over yet. How does that water, flowing high in a channel on top of arches or deep within a tunnel, actually reach the thirsty citizen down in the bustling streets? Or fill the thousands of gallons needed for the grand imperial baths? The answer lies in another layer of sophisticated engineering, the intricate distribution network within the city itself. Once an aqueduct reached the city limits, its main channel typically terminated at a large distribution tank, known as a castellum aquae. These weren't just simple cisterns. They were often substantial, architecturally significant buildings, usually situated on high ground to maintain pressure for the downstream network. Think of them as the grand central stations of the water system. Inside, the water might pass through several chambers, allowing for a final settling of any remaining sediment before it was divided up for distribution. Each aqueduct likely fed one or more of these primary castella. From the primary castellum, the water needed to be allocated. This often happened in a section sometimes called a castellum divisorium, though the terminology can be a bit fluid. Here, the engineers faced the crucial task of dividing the bulk flow into multiple smaller streams destined for different parts of the city or different types of users. The architect Vitruvius, writing in the time of Augustus, described an ideal setup for a castellum. It should have 3 separate outlets, each feeding its own pipeline network, one exclusively for public basins and fountains, one for the public baths, which paid a tax or fee, and one for private residences, who also paid for their connections. His logic was that the essential public fountains should always have water, if supply diminished. The private users would be cut off first, then the baths, ensuring the basic needs of the populace were prioritized. How strictly this idealized tripartite division was implemented across all of Rome's numerous castella is a subject of scholarly debate. Reality might have been messier. Influenced by political clout, neighborhood needs, or simply the physical layout of the pipes. However, the principle of controlled division was key. Frontinus describes how bronze nozzles, called calices, of precisely calibrated, standardized diameters were fitted to the outlets of the castella. The size of the calyx determined the volume of water that could flow into the attached pipe per unit of time. By carefully managing the number and size of these calices, the water commissioners aimed to control how much water was drawn off for each main distribution line. These main pipes, typically large diameter lead fistulae, then snaked their way under the streets of Rome, heading towards different districts. Along their routes, they would feed into smaller, secondary castella. These acted like neighborhood substations, receiving water from a main line and then further dividing it to serve a specific area, perhaps a few city blocks or a particular large consumer like a bathhouse. These secondary tanks also helped regulate pressure within their local network. Imagine a complex, branching system, like the trunk and limbs of a great tree, carrying water throughout the city. The pipes themselves, as we've touched upon, were predominantly made of lead, plumbum. Sheets of lead were formed into cylinders and soldered along the seam. Frontinus mentions various standard diameters. This vast network of lead pipes running beneath the paving stones and into buildings represented an enormous investment and a constant source of maintenance work, as pipes could corrode, leak, or be damaged by shifting ground or nearby construction. The Romans were truly masters of plumbing, in the most literal sense derived from the Latin word for lead. Terracotta pipes were also used, particularly perhaps for smaller diameter connections or in areas where lead was less readily available or desired. So where did all this carefully channeled water end up? The most visible and vital delivery points for the average Roman were the public fountains. Hundreds upon hundreds of these dotted the city. Frontinus mentions nearly 600 public basins, lacus, alone in his time, plus numerous smaller decorative or spouting fountains, salients. These provided free access to water for the vast majority of Rome's population who couldn't afford or weren't permitted a private connection. People would come with buckets and jars to collect water for drinking, cooking, and washing. Fountains were often social hubs, places to meet and chat while waiting your turn. They ranged from simple, functional stone basins to elaborate, sculpted creations designed to beautify public squares. And here's a delightful quirky tidbit: some Roman fountains weren't just decorative. They were technological marvels, incorporating water clocks, horologia ex aqua, that used the steady flow to mark time. Or even featuring water-powered automata, little moving figures that put on a show for the public, driven by ingenious hydraulic mechanisms. The biggest consumers of water, by far, were the public baths. The grand imperial thermae, like those of Agrippa, Nero/Alexander, Trajan, Caracalla, Diocletian, and the hundreds of smaller neighborhood balnei required a constant, massive inflow to fill their hot, warm, and cold pools, supply steam rooms, and serve their fountains and latrines. Large diameter pipes ran directly to these complexes, ensuring they had the staggering volumes needed to sustain the central Roman social ritual of bathing. Without the aqueducts, the Roman bathing culture simply could not have existed on such a scale. Even public latrines often benefited from the aqueducts. Many were designed with a channel of continuously flowing water running beneath the seats, providing a remarkably effective, if perhaps rather communal, flushing system. Finally, there were the private connections. Access to running water piped directly into your home, domus, or apartment building, insula, was a significant luxury, a status symbol available only to the wealthy elite, imperial properties. And certain businesses, upon receiving an official grant, beneficium, from the emperor or the curator's aquarum. This grant specified the amount of water allocated, usually defined by the size of the calyx fitted to the pipe branching off the public main. Water typically flowed continuously into a decorative basin or small fountain in the courtyard or garden, from which household members could draw water. This system, however, was ripe for abuse. As Frontinus lamented, homeowners might bribe officials for a grant, or illegally enlarge their connecting pipe after inspection, or simply make a completely unauthorized connection, stealing water directly from the public mains. The stamped inscriptions on lead pipes, detailing the owner and the grant, were an attempt to combat this fraud. It's important to remember that this entire distribution system operated under relatively low pressure, dictated by the height difference between the castella and the delivery point. Water flowed continuously. Taps that could be turned on and off at will were not the norm for most endpoints. The constant overflow from fountains and basins wasn't necessarily seen as waste, it helped flush the streets and drains, contributing to city sanitation. This intricate web of tanks, pipes, and fountains was the final, crucial stage in the long journey of water to the Roman consumer. It translated the engineering marvel of the aqueducts into tangible benefits: clean drinking water, relaxing baths, flushing latrines, sparkling fountains, that profoundly shaped the urban environment and the daily lives of everyone in Rome. From the emperor in his palace to the plebeian filling a jug at the corner fountain. It was a system remarkable not just for its scale, but for its attempt to manage and distribute a vital resource across a vast and complex city. For century after glorious century, the aqueducts had defined Rome, their constant, life-giving flow underpinning the city's growth, health, and very identity. The intricate network of channels, tanks, and pipes we've explored was a marvel of sustained engineering and administration. But empires fade, cities shrink, and even the most impressive infrastructure eventually succumbs to the forces of time and turmoil. The story of the Roman aqueducts doesn't end with a final, triumphant construction. It enters a long, slow twilight of decline, punctuated by moments of dramatic violence, before ultimately falling silent, leaving behind ghostly remnants of past grandeur. The decline wasn't sudden, but rather a gradual erosion accelerated by several factors. Internally, the Roman Empire faced increasing challenges from the 3rd century AD onwards. The political instability of the crisis of the 3rd century, with its rapid turnover of emperors and civil wars, strained the imperial treasury. Maintaining the vast and expensive aqueduct system required consistent funding and stable administration, both of which became harder to guarantee. Economic difficulties, perhaps subtly reflected even in the construction quality of the later Aqua Alexandrina, meant fewer resources were available for the constant, essential upkeep. Furthermore, the decision by Emperor Constantine in the early 4th century AD to establish a new imperial capital at Constantinople gradually shifted political focus and resources away from Rome. While Rome remained symbolically important, its population likely began a slow decline long before the final collapse of the Western Empire, reducing both the demand for water and the tax base needed to maintain the system supplying it. Externally, the empire faced increasing pressure from migrating peoples and military threats along its borders. Eventually, these pressures breached the frontiers, leading to invasions and warfare directly impacting Italy and Rome itself. While earlier barbarian sacks of Rome, like the Visigoths in AD 410 or the Vandals in AD 455, were damaging, they didn't necessarily destroy the aqueduct system entirely. The truly devastating blow came later. During the Gothic War fought between the Eastern Roman, Byzantine, Empire seeking to reconquer Italy and the Ostrogothic kingdom ruling the peninsula. In AD 537, the Ostrogothic king Witiges laid siege to Rome, which was being defended by the brilliant Byzantine general Belisarius. Witiges, recognizing the strategic importance of the aqueducts, made a fateful decision. As the contemporary historian Procopius vividly recounts, the Goths systematically cut all, or almost all, of the 11 aqueducts where they ran on vulnerable arches outside the city walls. Their motives were likely twofold: primarily to deny the vast water supply to the besieged population and defenders, creating thirst and a sanitation crisis within the walls, and secondarily, perhaps, to use the now dry, man-sized channels as potential secret routes to infiltrate the city's defenses, though this latter tactic seems not to have succeeded. The impact of cutting the aqueducts was immediate and catastrophic. The constant gush of water into Rome's fountains, baths, and homes slowed to a trickle, then stopped. The city, accustomed for centuries to seemingly limitless clean water, was thrown back onto the meager resources within its walls, the polluted Tiber River, ancient wells, and whatever springs existed locally. Sanitation, reliant on flushing water, collapsed, likely leading to disease. Here's a fantastic tidbit showing Belisarius's resourcefulness: the aqueducts, particularly the Aqua Triana reaching the high Janiculum Hill, also powered Rome's vital water mills, which ground much of the city's grain supply. When the aqueducts were cut, these mills stopped, threatening starvation. Belisarius reportedly improvised brilliantly by mooring pairs of ships in the Tiber, suspending a water wheel between each pair, and using the river's current to power the mills, thus saving the city's flour supply. While Belisarius ultimately withstood the siege, the damage to the water system was profound and largely irreversible in the context of the times. Historians debate the exact speed and totality of the collapse after the siege ended in AD 538. Some partial repairs might have been attempted during brief periods of Byzantine control or later, perhaps allowing trickles of water through lower-level, less damaged channels like the Aqua Virgo. But the era of a fully functioning, centrally managed, high-volume water system was definitively over. The Gothic War dragged on for nearly 2 decades, devastating Italy and leaving Rome impoverished and battered. The complex administrative structure of the curators Aquarum and the skilled familia Aquaria, already weakened, likely disintegrated completely in the ensuing chaos. Without constant maintenance, the aqueduct succumbed to nature and neglect. Channels became choked with the sinter scale that crews no longer chipped away. Debris washed in and wasn't cleared. Arches, weakened by time, weather, or seismic tremors, began to crumble without repair. Leaks went unpatched, bleeding away what little water might still have flowed. The system simply died a slow death from lack of care. Compounding this was the dramatic depopulation of Rome itself. From a peak of perhaps 1 million inhabitants in the High Empire, the city shrank over the early Middle Ages to possibly only 20,000 to 30,000 people. This tiny population clustered in the low-lying areas near the Tiber River, the only reliable water source now. The vast network of aqueducts, designed for a sprawling metropolis, became utterly irrelevant and impossible to maintain for such a small community. Why repair miles of crumbling arches to bring water to abandoned hills? Throughout the Middle Ages, the colossal ruins of the aqueducts became part of a new, emptier landscape. They suffered the indignity of being treated as convenient quarries. Locals scavenged their dressed stone blocks for building churches, towers, and houses. The valuable lead pipes were dug up and melted down. This scavenging further accelerated the destruction of the structures. Sometimes, the sturdy arches found new uses. Incorporated into medieval fortifications, like the Porta Maggiore becoming a gate in the Aurelian walls, used as foundations for houses or monasteries, or their channels offering shelter or pathways through the countryside. They became ghosts haunting the Roman Campagna, reminders of a lost golden age. For nearly 1,000 years, Rome largely relied on the Tiber, wells, and springs, its water situation closer to its pre-aqueduct beginnings than its imperial peak. Then came the Renaissance. With a renewed interest in classical antiquity and a desire by the popes to restore Rome's prestige and improve living conditions, attention turned back to the ancient water system. The popes recognized, as the emperors had, that a reliable water supply was essential for a thriving city and a powerful symbol of good governance. The first major revival effort focused on the Aqua Virgo. Because it ran mostly underground and at a low level, parts of it had possibly maintained a trickle of flow through the centuries. or were at least more easily reparable than the hierarchated systems. Starting in the 15th century and continuing through the 16th, popes commissioned work to restore the Virgo's channel, clearing it and bringing clean spring water back into the city center. This revived flow wasn't initially for mass distribution, but primarily to feed the spectacular new Renaissance and Baroque fountains being built, like the Trevi Fountain and those in Piazza Navona, symbols of Rome's rebirth. Later, other aqueducts were partially revived. The Aqua Felice, 1586, reused parts of the Aqua Alexandrina's route and springs and possibly sections of the Marcia/Claudia arcades, bringing another source back online. Renaissance architects and engineers also studied the aqueduct ruins intently, marveling at the Roman engineering principles and adapting them for their own projects. Thus, the legacy of the Roman aqueducts endured, even after their original function ceased. Their physical ruins shaped the landscape, their materials were recycled into medieval structures, and their memory inspired a later age to harness water once again, bringing life back to the fountains of Rome. The Goths may have cut the flow, but they couldn't erase the ingenuity or the enduring symbol of Rome's watery lifeline. And so, the grand narrative of Rome's aqueducts reaches its end, not with a sudden stop, but with a slow fading, leaving behind echoes that resonate even today. Looking back across the 14 centuries we've traversed, from the simple necessity driving the first underground channel of the Appia to the monumental arcades of the Claudia and the final flourish of the Alexandrina, the sheer scale and enduring impact of this system are breathtaking. It was more than just plumbing, it was the circulatory system of an empire's heart, the lifeblood that allowed Rome to grow, to flourish, and to support a population density and urban lifestyle unparalleled in the ancient world. The legacy of this achievement rippled outwards, both in time and space. While the immediate aftermath of the Western Empire's collapse saw a decline in large-scale hydraulic engineering in much of Europe, the knowledge wasn't entirely lost. Roman techniques likely influenced water management in the surviving Eastern Roman, Byzantine, Empire. In the Islamic world, engineers developed sophisticated water systems, often employing qanats, underground channels tapping groundwater. A technique with ancient Persian roots, but also demonstrating knowledge of canals and pressure systems that may have benefited from preserved classical texts or observable Roman ruins in conquered territories like North Africa and Spain. The precise extent of direct technological inheritance versus independent innovation or adaptation of Roman methods in post-Roman societies is complex and continues to be debated by historians of technology, weighing textual clues against archaeological evidence. Closer to Rome, medieval monastic communities, often needing reliable water for agriculture, milling, and daily life, sometimes preserved or adapted Roman hydraulic knowledge on a smaller scale. But it was during the Renaissance that the Roman aqueducts truly experienced an intellectual rebirth. As scholars and artists rediscovered classical texts and architects measured and sketched the imposing ruins, they marveled at the skill of the ancient engineers. Figures like Leonardo da Vinci studied hydraulics, and Renaissance popes, seeking to restore Rome's glory, explicitly looked to the ancient aqueducts as models when commissioning repairs like that of the Aqua Virgo, or building new conduits like the Aqua Felice. They recognized that mastering water was key to civic renewal, just as it had been key to imperial power. Today, the most striking legacy is physical. The ruins of Roman aqueducts are among the most impressive and evocative monuments left by the ancient world. Think of the Pont du Gard in southern France. Its 3 tiers of arches striding majestically across the Gardon River, technically part of the aqueduct supplying Nîmes, it stands as a UNESCO World Heritage Site, instantly recognizable. Picture the astonishing double-tiered arcades marching through the city center of Segovia in Spain, a testament to Roman engineering prowess enduring for 2 millennia. And around Rome itself, the broken lines of arches stretching across the Campagna, silhouetted against the sunset, remain powerful visual anchors to the past, firing the imagination of artists, poets, and tourists alike. They are tangible connections to the ambition and capabilities of the civilization that built them. You might even find, if you look closely in some accessible preserved channels, tiny details like inspection graffiti, small marks or notes scratched into the lining by the aquarii, the maintenance workers, centuries ago. These almost invisible traces offer a poignant, personal link to the routine human effort that kept these vast systems alive. Beyond the physical ruins, the conceptual legacy endures. Many core principles pioneered or perfected by Roman hydroengineers remain fundamental to modern water management. The meticulous selection and protection of water sources, the preference for gravity flow wherever terrain and economics permit, it's still the cheapest way to move water, the understanding of hydraulic gradients, the construction of large-scale public works to serve entire communities. These are all concepts deeply rooted in Roman practice. Of course, modern systems benefit from technologies the Romans lacked: powerful electric pumps, advanced tunneling machinery, sophisticated filtration and chemical purification plants, computerized monitoring, and materials like ductile iron or plastic pipes. Yet, the fundamental challenge of sourcing, transporting, and distributing large quantities of clean water reliably to urban populations is one the Romans tackled with astonishing success using the tools and knowledge available to them, laying a conceptual foundation for the municipal water systems we often take for granted today. The aqueducts also remain potent symbols. They represent Roman power, the ability to command resources and reshape landscapes across vast distances. They symbolize Roman order and organization, the capacity for complex planning, administration, and long-term maintenance. They stand for Roman engineering skill, practical, audacious, and durable. And they embody a Roman commitment to civic life, providing a fundamental resource that benefited, though not always equally, the entire populace, enabling public health through baths and sanitation, and beautifying the city with countless fountains. Ultimately, perhaps the greatest testament to the Roman aqueducts is the quiet, foundational nature of their achievement. They provided water, that simple, essential substance. But in doing so, they enabled everything else. They allowed Rome to become Rome. They supported its dense population, facilitated its unique bathing culture, flushed its waste, powered its mills, adorned its public spaces, and contributed to the very health and well-being of its citizens for century after century. It was an achievement woven into the fabric of daily existence, often invisible when functioning perfectly, but catastrophic when interrupted. As you drift now, letting the story settle, picture those ancient structures. Maybe imagine the faint echo of water that once rushed through channels now silent, or the sight of the surviving arches under a quiet moonlit sky. Enduring reminders of an empire's thirst and the incredible ingenuity marshaled to quench it. The immense effort, the grand scale, the quiet persistence of flowing water, all fading now into the background. And so, our long journey following the flow of water into ancient Rome comes to a gentle close. The monumental efforts of engineers and laborers, the political ambitions of emperors, the daily routines of citizens drawing water from fountains, all these vivid scenes can now soften and recede, like ripples smoothing out on a calm surface. The story is told, the great structures stand silent in the fields of history, or perhaps whisper quietly through the waters of a fountain like the Trevi, still flowing after all this time. But even that gentle sound can fade now, merging with the soft hum of the fan, or the quiet stillness of your room. There are no more dates to remember. No more engineering feats to puzzle over. Just the comfortable weight of your blankets, the gentle rhythm of your own breathing. Let the darkness be a soft curtain, letting the day and its details dissolve. Allow your mind to drift away from the Tiber and the 7 hills, away from the arches and the tunnels. Feel the tension ease from your shoulders, your arms, your legs. There is nothing more required of you now than to relax, to let go, to embrace the peace of the approaching sleep. The story is complete. Your journey for tonight is done. Rest now.